For 10,000 years, humanity has beseeched the emperor to ascend from his gilded seat. That moment has arrived at last. Yet, as his awareness surges into being with a deafening roar, countless billions perish, their thoughts wiped clean in a flash. The custodes who have shielded him across endless ages now crumple to the ground. Only Captain Malkian stands firm, gazing in dread as the horrifying reality dawns. This is no deliverance. I witnessed the Emperor's eyes flutter open. 10 millennia of unyielding guardianship. Never once did I envision that this instant would flood me with such profound fear. I am Captain Malchian Vane of the Adeptus Custodes, the 10,000, his elite protectors. We who maintain an everlasting vigil beside the golden throne. We who have observed a deity's gradual erosion over countless eras. We who have beheld civilizations ascend and crumble as we uphold our perpetual duty. And now, I stand as the sole survivor to recount the actual events of his revival. The initial omen struck abruptly. A faint vibration rippled across the inner sanctum's floor, so delicate that merely the attuned could perceive it. The tech priests waved it off as yet another adjustment in the throne's venerable machinery. The Sisters of Silence sensed no disturbance amid their void aura. But we custodians understand the palace like the contours of our own plate. This felt distinct. I recall that precise instant vividly. Positioned at the southeast flank of the golden throne, my halberd grounded securely on the gleaming obsidian tiles, my gaze locked ahead after 4 centuries of steadfast watch. The quiver returned, more forceful now. The atmosphere thickened, laden with unseen surges of energy like static in the void. The tech priests hastened their paces at their consoles, mechadendrites whirring and clattering with fresh haste. Shield Captain Valoris tilted his ornate helm ever so slightly in my direction. Across 10,000 years, no custodian had ever shifted stance in the inner sanctum, absent immediate peril or order. But a transformation was underway. An oppressive force mounted inside my mind, a pressure I'd known only from the strongest null zones conjured by the Sisters of Silence, though this was vastly more intense, more pinpointed. Then the illumination burst forth, not from the throne's devices or the myriad flames and lamps bathing the immense hall in light. This glow emanated from him, from the desiccated husk that had endured immobile for 10,000 years. A aureate shimmer that started as a subtle gleam and swelled rapidly, eclipsing all other sources in the room. I caught the tech priest's wails, laced with both panic and ecstasy. Peering through narrowed lids, I watched their crimson garments pool on the ground as they fell in worship. The Sisters of Silence started to spasm, crimson trails leaking from under their visors. Despite their anti-psychic gifts, they couldn't resist the unfolding force. My own psyche buckled under a colossal burden, as though the Imperium's full mass bore down on my thoughts. Through iron resolve, bolstered by my augmented body and psychic fortitude, I held my ground while death claimed those nearby. That's when I perceived it. Amid the searing blaze, I discerned the gaunt figure upon the throne. Those bony digits, inert for ages untold, now flexed deliberately. The time-worn skeleton groaned aloud, cutting through the escalating warp storm. And then, against all reason, his skull lifted. The whole chamber quaked violently. Debris and rock shards cascaded from the vaulted dome far overhead. Venerable servo skulls plummeted from the heights, their cogitators extinguished in a heartbeat. Yet the radiance intensified, hurling ethereal beams from his shape that twisted shadows into unnatural forms. Shadows that slithered with intent and spite, though no solid source birthed them. And then he unveiled his eyes. As those primordial lids separated, the warp itself rent asunder. A warp howl exploded not via sound waves, but woven into reality's weave. It pierced me like a glacial lance, halting my dual hearts for a breath before they pounded anew. Servitors and minor aides around me tumbled lifeless, gore spilling from orifices as his rekindled mind obliterated their souls on contact. Beyond the chamber's panes, chaos unfolded over Terra. Vast spires of auric fire lanced upward from the crust, breaching the skies into the emptiness above. Whole hive districts imploded like under bombardments. Hover trains plummeted from transit routes in cascades of wreckage. In the heavens, vessels detonated, their reactors blooming in mute firestorms observable from the ground. I alone of the custods present endured upright, though the reason eludes me. Perhaps my ceaseless nearness to him over those many centuries had bestowed. It granted me a faint resistance against the immense force now emanating from the throne. Maybe he intended something for me. I couldn't say. Yet I observed my fellow custodians collapse, their splendid auramite plate clanging on the stone like forgotten playthings. The glow emanating from his gaze defied human understanding, surpassing even the augmented perceptions of one like me. It resembled the birth of twin stars inside the room, stars that chilled rather than scorched, stars that exposed not only tangible forms but the core of cognition itself. Those eyes probed me, scanning beyond my corporeal shell to the depths of my soul, inventorying each idea, recollection, and uncertainty I'd ever held. In that instant, I realized this wasn't the emperor we'd envisioned, not the compassionate patriarch of humanity come back to rescue his imperium from oblivion. No, this was another entity entirely, one reshaped by 10,000 years of indescribable torment, 10,000 years of observing the gradual decay of his vision, 10,000 years of persisting as both cadaver and deity. This was fury made manifest. Amid the torment pounding my head and the crush that nearly pulverized my existence, his voice resounded, not through my hearing, but straight into my psyche. A voice embracing infinities, carrying the burden of ages, imparting truths far exceeding simple language. Malshan, it declared, invoking a title I'd all but abandoned after ages of mere custodian duty. Behold what comes next. The radiance surged, no longer just flowing from him but probing outward. Strands of golden power stretched across the chamber and further, piercing barriers as though they didn't exist. I sensed those strands spanning Terra, the solar system, the galaxy at large, and with each contact, I understood they were evaluating, assessing, dooming. I perceived the fatalities more than heard them, trillions of lives extinguished in a flash across Terra by itself. Every sham holy figure, every venal cleric who'd warped his teachings for self-interest, every follower of the imperial cult who'd deified him contrary to his long-ago command. Their psyches simply vanished, wiped away by his unrelenting verdict. Throughout the galaxy, psychers shrieked and perished as his might brushed them via the warp. Navigators descended into insanity, their mutant sights searing as they confronted an illumination too horrific to grasp. Astropaths went mute during their messages, their frames disintegrating into dust under his decree. The Astronomicon, already a piercing blaze, now ignited with fresh intent, transformed from mere lighthouse to instrument of purge, cleansing the warp of the horrors that had gorged on human misery for thousands of years. And this was merely the start. I witnessed his shriveled body alter, the withered tissue swelling not with earthly brawn and sinew, but with raw psychic force taking solid shape. The myriad conduits and devices that had preserved his remains for 10,000 years detached, the time-worn alloys and synthetics dissolving from his revitalized frame. The surviving tech priests cried out in mingled dread and rapture as the hallowed apparatuses of the Golden Throne, which they'd maintained with pious zeal across millennia, were made irrelevant in seconds. He ascended from the seat gradually, relentlessly, akin to an elemental power clad in human guise. His soles met the obsidian ground after 10 millennia for the first time. At each point of contact, the rock transmuted, evolving past mere substance. Existence wavered from every stride, the fundamental rules of nature yielding to his aura. I saw him advance, each footfall crackling with intent. His shape had become an outline of unadulterated golden luminescence, loosely human-like, yet ever morphing, as though a static body held no relevance for him anymore. Solely his visage stayed familiar, awe-inspiring in its splendor, the countenance that had sparked countless wars, forged human unity, and served as the final sight for the great betrayer Horus before his end. But those eyes held nothing mortal within. As he drew near, my armor heated up, the venerable auramite vibrating to his essence like a chime struck true. My blade thrummed, its energy sheath blazing intensely enough to dazzle an ordinary soul. He halted in front of me, looming above my imposing stature, the sole presence in the cosmos that ever diminished me. Stand, Malkian Vane, final remnant of my loyal sentinels. Tasks await. His command evaded my senses altogether, embedding itself in my awareness with such intensity that darkness almost claimed me. Suddenly, I was upright, unaware of having shifted from the prostrate stance I'd instinctively taken. My armor felt invigorated with unexpected grace, as if his proximity had sanctified it beyond even the ingenuity of ancient artisans, among the finest craftsmen. Speak to me, my child. What fate has befallen my realm during my long sleep? How could anyone reply to that? How to condense 10 millennia of gradual decline, graft, perpetual conflict, belief warped into zealotry, advancement choked by myth? Words escaped me. Even rational ideas crumbled beneath the intensity of his gaze. Yet it wasn't required. I sensed his psyche delving into my recollections with ease, pulling out all I'd observed across my endless years, all the lessons drawn from the annals of time. His mounting anger swelled within me, an icy rage that chilled my very core. They've dismantled all I built, the core doctrine forsaken, knowledge offered up to the flames of folly. Mankind shackled by the very myths I aim to shatter, and you, my guardians, demoted to mere ornaments beside a vacant seat of power. I yearned to argue, to uphold the realm that had endured against staggering perils, to justify the harsh choices that shaped us into our current form. But before him, those notions rang false, like a youth's feeble alibi for mischief. He shifted his focus from me, directing it afar, past the palace barriers, beyond the dread enveloping all. I perceived his awareness stretching out, brushing psyches throughout the stars, some crumbling at once under his influence, others reshaped by it. And within the immaterium, a massive upheaval stirred, as though the chaos entities had abruptly encountered a hunter infinitely more horrifying than any nightmare they'd conjured. Quoto, he declared, the declaration vibrating deep in my skeleton. Defying my direct orders, they contorted my ideals into a creed of sightless devotion and rote submission. They erected a domain of torment bearing my mark, and soon they will discover the real essence of divine retribution. I grasped the horror unfolding, not redemption, not the glorious resurgence the realm had implored. This heralded annihilation. This marked the close of all existence. For in his stare, humankind had betrayed him utterly. The vision of imperial enlightenment lay shattered, supplanted by the very credulity and benightedness he'd battled to eradicate. And now, roused from eons of torment, upheld solely by his unbreakable resolve and the ritual slaying of countless seers each day, what emerged wasn't the mythic sovereign of tales. This was an entity forged in retribution, resolute in purging the stars of the rot his cherished race had spawned. What unfolds when the emperor stirs? The cosmos shudders, the deities cower in dread, and humanity confronts the reckoning it unwittingly invoked. And I, Malkian Vane, the final devoted heir to the authentic sovereign, confronted a decision no protector ought to face: to obey my deity or to shield mankind from his wrath. The heart of the shrine had transformed into a crypt. Forms sprawled amid the dark stone expanse, their last instants captured in expressions of ecstasy or horror. The atmosphere hung heavy with the metallic bite of gore and the sharp reek of scorched wiring. Beyond the vast reinforced panes, the outline of the sovereign citadel loomed, formerly the grandest panorama of mortal achievement, now half demolished. Vast portions had tumbled down, as if the rock and alloy had surrendered their strength to endure. The emperor glided amid the wreckage like a legend from forgotten lore, his aureate glow casting light on the ruin born of his mere resurgence. I trailed behind, my augmented frame heeding his silent directive. The inner halls, once teeming with petitioners, machine cultists, and sentinels, now echoed in stillness, broken only by the resonance of his steps and the solid clank of my plated strides. We traversed rooms where exalted counselors had once conferred, now cluttered with remains draped across time-worn desks. We strode past shrines where devotees had venerated him as supreme, The gilded eagles and holy emblems had fused into distorted masses of rare ore. In places where piety burned brightest, demise struck most utterly. As we neared the eternity portal, the colossal barrier dividing the core stronghold from the periphery, I spotted the initial sparks of defiance, a rank of warriors from diverse legions, their plates scarred from countless clashes, held rifles at the ready. Their visors were doffed, their countenances firm yet laced with fright. In their midst loomed a warrior, clad in elaborate masterwork armor, the sigils of the imperial fists shining amid the eerie illumination. Quote Phantom 1, intoned the Astarte's commander, his tone unwavering despite the dread I detected beneath. Quote 2. I braced myself, convinced these valiant yet errant fighters were moments from erasure. To challenge the Emperor, to confront him armed, no matter how deferentially, was beyond comprehension. Yet he halted, his luster softening Slade gently, as though honing it for the impending moment. He refined the glow. Quote 3. He declared, his words resonating not via the atmosphere, but straight into our thoughts. My imperfect offspring, destined to safeguard humanity rather than imprison it. Behold me, and recognize your shortcomings. The radiance emanating from his figure surged once more, yet now it was directed precisely. A ray of unadulterated golden power that lanced toward the Space Marines. I anticipated their instant disintegration, their bioengineered forms incinerated to cinders under his fury. But what transpired was infinitely worse. They started to transform. Their plating, their armaments, even their very skin turning sheer, exposing the reality hidden within. I glimpsed the taint in their gene seed, the imperfections that had accumulated across 10,000 years of faulty breeding. I perceived the arrogance that had supplanted obligation, the unquestioning loyalty that had overtaken logic. I witnessed each concession, each lapse, each instant where they had favored doctrine over veracity. And they saw it too. Gradually, they dropped to their knees, their gear dropping with resounding clangs onto the ground. Some shed tears without restraint, their features twisted in torment as they grappled with the chasm separating their current state from their original purpose. Others just gaped, their psyches overwhelmed by the imposed enlightenment. Solely the captain stayed upright, though he staggered like he'd taken a solid hit. His cheeks glistened with moisture, but his gaze stayed locked on the Emperor with a loyalty that pierced beyond the dread of his discovery. "We have let you down," he stated plainly. "Yet we have forever cherished you, Father." For an instant, an unnamed sentiment flashed over the Emperor's countenance, vanishing nearly as soon as it appeared. Quote Sillan, he uttered, the term vibrating with intricate tones. Quote Tadurus. His illumination flared anew, and this time, when it hit the captain, it brought no insight, only obliteration. The esteemed Space Marine, survivor of innumerable clashes against humanity's foes, simply vanished from being. Not scorched, not ripped asunder, but expunged, as though he'd never existed. The rest succumbed in sequence, their lives extinguished with the nonchalant ease of someone brushing away pests. I remained frozen in place, my consciousness reeling from the spectacle unfolding before me. These were the Emperor's personal progeny, his genetic heirs, no matter how removed. They had devoted 10,000 years to his cause, battling and perishing in his honor throughout the galaxy's expanse, and he had wiped them out without pause, without pity. "You doubt my deeds, Malchon." His focus shifted to me, that boundless scrutiny piercing my psychic barriers like they were fog. "You ponder whether this constitutes fairness, whether this fulfills what humanity beseeched amid the endless ages of my confinement." I offered no reply. I was incapable, yet my inner turmoil exposed me. "I have probed your thoughts, steadfast Malchon. I understand your conviction that the Imperium, despite its blemishes, its brutality and myths, serves as the sole bulwark shielding humanity from oblivion. You hold that I am dooming mankind to ruin by dismantling the frameworks, however tainted, that have sustained it." With emotion, he warped the fabric around us. Abruptly, we were no longer in the hallway beyond the Eternity Gate, but positioned on a ledge overlooking the outer palace from on high. The panorama stretching out was one of devastation. Vast expanses of the boundless metropolis known as Terra lay ablaze or crumbled into debris. The heavens raged with bizarre tempests, streaks of golden thunder crashing from empty skies, and amid it all, I felt the casualties mounting. Trillions of lives assessed and deemed deficient. This is not doom, Malkathian. This is renewal. His tone had mellowed, nearly tender, while still laced with the unyielding command that tolerated no opposition. Humanity has squandered 10,000 years unraveling in my honor. They have erected a realm atop the remains of their kin. They have traded liberty for safety, honesty for solace, tomorrow for yesterday. They have devolved below their essence while proclaiming themselves humanity's zenith. He faced me, his visage at once stunning and fearsome, like a parent's compelled to correct adored young ones. I did not forge humanity to revere me. I established the Imperium to liberate them from superstition's chains and terror's grip, to steer them to an era devoid of deities or sovereigns, where every life unfolds under reason's clarity and empathy's warmth. Witness instead what they have wrought. With a wave, he broadened my awareness, letting me view through the senses of 1 billion individuals spanning Terra. I beheld the grotesque disparities, the enormous multitudes laboring living under circumstances barely above bondage, while the elite nobles wallowed in opulence beyond comprehension. I observed the offhand brutality, the existences discarded over the pettiest excuses. I witnessed the folklore that supplanted reason, the rote ceremonies that overtook insight. I beheld a realm that safeguarded human existence, yet eradicated all that rendered it meaningful. And past the horror, the apparition broadened. Overpopulated planets where countless billions existed and perished, never having glimpsed the heavens. Manufacturing spheres where mortal tissue merged with machinery, not to elevate, but to dominate. Lethal orbs where youths were offered up to yield mere squads of superhuman warriors. A dominion that consumed its populace to perpetuate itself, perpetrating untold horrors in survival's guise. "This isn't my dominion," he declared. "This isn't the cause I battled for, nor what my heirs perished defending. This is a distortion, a travesty of all I aim to construct." The apparition dissolved, pulling me back to the terrace, to the spectacle of the horror city aflame. Yet now I detected what had escaped me earlier. Within the chaos, certain spots received the aureate radiance with less severity. Secluded enclaves where the residents abruptly halted, their gazes expanding as fresh comprehension ignited inside them. Lone figures dispersed across the wreckage who now acted with intent, their countenances altered by enlightenment instead of annihilated by verdict. I am not annihilating mankind, Malchon. I am redeeming it. Those who erected their worlds on deceptions, on adoring a fabricated deity modeled after me. Those who gained from the torment of their kin, who concealed wisdom that ought to have been disseminated, who invoked my title to legitimize their dominance, they hold no role in the era ahead. But those who pursued verity amid the falsehoods imposed upon them, who displayed empathy within a framework meant to suppress it, who challenged when commanded solely to submit, they shall form the core of a renewed mankind, one deserving of the destiny I once conceived. He averted his gaze from the panorama of ruin, his focus shifting internally to an essence beyond my grasp. Yet initially, the entrenched regime must be utterly deconstructed. The entities that twisted my ideals must be shattered irreparably. The spurious creed erected in my honor must be eradicated from mortal awareness, and those who profited greatest from this decay must endure the severest retribution. I sensed his scrutiny extending afar, past the horror city, past the solar domain, into the immense void of the cosmos. And I comprehended what followed. The Martian overlords with their stockpiled innovations, the legion commanders of the military orders with their medieval realms, the interrogators with their unchecked dominion and hidden motives. All who had amassed authority on the bedrock of his seclusion, they would next confront his reckoning. And thereafter, a confrontation with foes more ancient and dreadful yet. the warp entities that had tainted his cherished progeny, the extraterrestrial dominions that had exploited mankind in its frailties, the primordial malevolences skulking in the galaxy's shadowed fringes. None would evade his illuminating regard. It would signal the conclusion of all. Every authority, every structure, every doctrine that had shaped the stars for 10,000 years, eradicated to clear space for novelty, for an entity I was starting to realize would exclude the overwhelming bulk of humanity in its present form. And at that instant, positioned alongside the entity I had been forged to protect, the deity I had truly venerated, albeit silently for ages, I felt the initial germ of uncertainty embed in my essence, a query no guardian ought to entertain. Did the Emperor merit continued loyalty? That germ of uncertainty flourished as we navigated the remnants of humanity's once supreme society. The Emperor advanced with dire intent, his radiance assessing and damning all it encountered. I saw the demise of billions, their psyches obliterated by a mere flicker of his will. I viewed venerable organizations collapse, their heads evaluated and deemed deficient. I observed the full machinery of imperial rule, amassed across 10,000 years, disassembled in mere hours. For many, oblivion struck swiftly. Their awareness snuffed out the instant his glow reached them. For others, the gravest culprits by his measure, demise arrived more gradually. Elevated nobles who had governed in his stead were compelled to endure the agonies their choices had wrought, reliving each fatality, each instant of anguish, each hopelessness their reign had spawned. Ecclesiarchal clerics were shown the authentic emperor they had ignored, their convictions incinerated by his tangible essence prior to their own ends. Interrogators who had orchestrated mass slaughters in his cause endured the passing of every blameless life they had sentenced. It constituted retribution in its way, yet retribution devoid of clemency, devoid of regard or the dire predicaments these people had endured, ignoring that the majority were merely striving to safeguard what they thought he had established. We found ourselves amid the wreckage of the ecclesiarchal palace, that enormous cathedral sprawl, which had served as the heart of the imperial creed. The gilded effigies had liquefied, the colored panes had fractured, the holy scriptures had incinerated. The clergy who once maintained this sanctuary had vanished, their remains absent, as though wiped clean from reality altogether. Why did you lead me to this spot, my lord? I mustered the nerve to inquire at last. My words came out feeble and all too human amid the devastation's echo. He replied not with speech, but through visions, recollections drawn from my thoughts and woven with others into scenes of razor-sharp intensity. I witnessed the origins of the imperial cult in the era following his entombment on the golden throne. I observed the scheming maneuvers of its promoters, the sincere convictions of its propagators, the solace it offered to billions upon billions amid a cosmos of terrors. I viewed the Horus heresy through his eyes, the treachery of his favored offspring, the tainting of half his Space Marine chapters, the brink of ruin collapse of all he had forged. I shared his anguish as he compelled himself to end Horus, his sorrow as he lay shattered en route to the golden throne. And I sensed the instant his flesh gave out, yet his resolve held fast, binding him to endless torment. An endless vigil over his vision warped into horror. 10,000 years of torment, Melchior. 0 years observing my creations distorted into their antithesis. 10,000 years of shifting from a visionary leader into an unrelenting deity. How might that forge you? I pondered. How would it alter any entity regardless of might? For the initial time since stirring, a hint of uncertainty colored his tone. Not uncertainty in his choice's justice, but in the figure he had evolved into. They forged me into a god, Melchior. Contrary to my desires, counter to all I championed, they elevated me on a dais and venerated my concept while subverting every value I truly embodied. And through that, they reshaped me. The convictions of trillions carry their own force, their piety, their loyalty, their invocations. Across 10,000 years, it has assailed my awareness. Across 10,000 years, I have withstood not merely the bodily agony of my wrecked form, but the mental torment of their misguided reverence. He faced me then, his features more mortal than at any point post-revival, etched with weariness surpassing ancient empires. And yet I act as the divinity they crafted, censorious, pitiless, regarding humankind not as souls deserving empathy, but as a collective to mold, to assess, to damn or redeem at my caprice. This is their creation of me. Malchon, this is what I have permitted myself to turn into. I stood speechless. What reply could suit such a revelation from such an entity? He pressed on, his timbre gaining force, the brief fragility dissipating like dawn fog, yet it alters not. The Imperium in its current state defies redemption. It rests on pillars of deceit and dread. It sustains misery vast enough to shatter your sanity if grasped in full. It has forsaken every ideal I battled to uphold. It demands total dismantling before any true renewal can rise from the ashes. With a wave, he bent existence anew around us. Suddenly, we hovered in the void, gazing upon the world of dread below. The globe had mutated, vast stretches of its perpetual urban sprawl now reduced to rubble. The surrounding space brimmed with wreckage, fragments of vessels and outposts obliterated in the upheaval, the initial instance of his resurgence. Yet far more alarming was the shift overtaking the warp. The immaterium, that chaotic realm of mental forces, ever a seething pit of insanity and peril, was undergoing alteration. Mighty streams of aureate radiance now surged within it, scourging the foulness that had marred it for ages. The fiends and presences that dwelled there scattered from this glow or perished in its blaze, and driving this metamorphosis stood he. His mind stretched into the warp, remolding it via raw determination alone. I perceived the Chaos Gods' alarm as their territories faced incursion, as the spirits they ensnared slipped from their hold, as the rules of their domain bent to a might they deemed securely leashed. For the first occasion in 10,000 years, the ruinous forces tasted terror. Yet Chaos's spawn were not the sole ones touched. Throughout the stars, any creature with the faintest psychic spark sensed his essence. Most human psychers had perished in his awakening's dawn, their psyches too brittle against his bare potency. But now I could feel the demise rippling outward, ensnaring species that had never paid homage to him, that hadn't even heard whispers of his being. The surviving elders, those remnants who had endured Slaaneish's emergence, wailed as their essences faced judgment from a deity alien to them. The orcs, whose raw Wah essence had forged its own crude divinities, discovered those powers abruptly challenged by a force defying their grasp. Even the tyrannid hive mind, that immense extraterrestrial intellect devouring innumerable planets, shrank back from the radiant glow now permeating the warp. This wasn't redemption, nor was it retribution. This was annihilation across the stars. "My lord," I uttered, my tone firm amid the dread swelling inside me. "Is this genuinely your intent, the annihilation of every sentient existence?" He pivoted toward me, his features inscrutable, his gaze now ablaze with an illumination that nearly blinded my augmented sight. "Not annihilation, Malchon. Evolution. The deserving shall endure. Those capable of thriving in a cosmos devoid of gods except one, free from the prop of belief, liberated from soothing deceptions. They shall form the bedrock of the era to follow. And how many might that encompass, my lord? How many among the countless trillions inhabiting the galaxy now?" He paused in silence for what felt like an eternity, his focus apparently locked on the reconfiguration of existence unfolding nearby. "Fewer than you'd hope, Malchon. More than you might dread. Yet counts hold no weight. What counts is caliber, not volume. Mankind has multiplied into trillions, but what toll has that exacted on the singular human spirit? Preferable a billion liberated souls over a trillion bound by delusion and terror. My mind wandered to the Imperium I'd served, to the myriad existences devoted to upholding it, to the offerings rendered, the atrocities borne, all to safeguard a framework that, despite its imperfections, had preserved humanity amid a universe bent on its erasure. I reflected on the conviction that had bolstered everyday folk through existences of indescribable toil. I considered the valor displayed by unenhanced mortals, lacking my augmentations or privileges, who nonetheless confronted the void. And thus, I reached my choice. My lord, I must halt this. The declaration escaped my lips prior to my mind fully shaping the resolve fueling it, the gravest betrayal, an abomination surpassing conception. Still, I recognized its truth the instant it echoed. His scrutiny fixed upon me entirely then, that aureate stare concentrating with a ferocity poised to unravel me in place. My plate heated fiercely, my flesh starting to sear underneath. My psyche howled beneath the weight of his scrutiny. You'd oppose me, Malchon. You, forged to obey me, you who beheld the decay tainting all I constructed, you'd safeguard this travesty they've wrought from my imperium? Amid the torment, despite the inevitability of my demise, I held my ground. I'd protect mankind, my lord. The mankind that is not the ideal you envision, the mankind that has weathered 10,000 years of nightmare via devotion, offering, and resolve, the mankind that, imperfections notwithstanding, harbors the spark of all you once dreamed it could achieve. The strain mounted. I sensed capillaries rupturing in my eyes, in my mind. The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth as my fortified form raced to mend wounds outpacing the assault. My armor, built to defy the galaxy's harshest trials, began to soften and fuse around my frame. Yet, I persisted. They merit no such shield from you, Malchon. They've frittered away every boon I bestowed. They've erected a realm of torment atop the ashes of my vision. They've deified me while spurning every principle I championed. I locked eyes with him, though it resembled gazing into dual suns. They remain human, my lord, flawed, fearful, bound by narrow insight. But they've persisted. They've withstood terrors beyond your reckoning during your long repose. They warrant more than obliteration from the entity they've beseeched across 10 millennia. For a fleeting second, I glimpsed a shadow cross his visage. Uncertainty, acknowledgement, I couldn't tell, but the force diminished marginally. And what path would you propose for me, my loyal Malchon? Reclaim the golden throne? Renew my ceaseless watch as the Imperium festers in gradual ruin? Tolerate the adoration of trillions as they unravel in my honor? I possessed no retort. What option could I proffer to such a potent intellect, steeped in boundless wisdom? What accord might bridge his ideal of humanity's promise and the marred truth of its evolution? Then, without summons, a recollection emerged, not my own, but his, imparted in that instant of linkage. The Emperor, as he'd appeared amid the Great Crusade, positioned before the expansive viewport of his command vessel, surveying a freshly yielded planet, a human domain reintegrated into the Imperium's embrace, not by force, but by negotiation, by logic through our collective dream of a brighter tomorrow. In that instant, I sensed his deep pride, his optimism for the evolution of humankind, and something more stirred within me, something unforeseen from this entity who had just sentenced billions to oblivion. Affection. True devotion to the race he'd spent his life steering, safeguarding, and uplifting. My lord, I uttered, the phrase emerging haltingly amid the lingering torment coursing through my frame. You used to trust in humanity's ability to transcend its shortcomings. You once showed tolerance for their gradual progress into the superior forms you envisioned. Has that faith faded? Or have you merely shed the mercy that once balanced your verdicts? The force intensified once more, hoisting me airborne, my suit groaning under invisible strains that nearly pulverized it. Mercy, he boomed, the term echoing across the very fabric of the warp. For 10,000 years, I've observed them slaughtering one another in my honor, burning seekers of truth, tormenting doubters of their creeds, offering up their innocence to a deity who never heeded. And you dare mention mercy to me? Even amid the torment, even facing inevitable doom, I pressed on. Indeed, my lord, mercy, the trait you prized most highly, the trait that distinguished you from the despots of old, the trait that rendered your imperium a cause worth defending. He kept me aloft for what felt like forever, his psyche delving into mine, hunting for lies, vulnerabilities, the imperfection that might warrant my end. Meanwhile, his influence expanded through the stars, assessing, dooming, reshaping. At last, he lowered me. The crush subsided, though a remnant lingered. My armor lay in tatters. the former gleaming auramite now scorched and twisted by impossible fervor. No mortal armament could have wrought such ruin. My flesh underneath was seared, yet my augmented regeneration was already mending the wounds. Do you genuinely think they merit preservation, Malchon? This imperium that has forsaken every ideal I founded it upon? These mortals who revere me as divine while spurning all I imparted? I straightened against the ache, locking eyes with him as firmly as possible. I hold that amid the trillions you damn, some capture the essence of what you once cherished in humanity. Valor, empathy, the drive to better themselves in their realm, they form the few. True, they've ever been the few, yet they persist, and they warrant an opportunity to forge anew from the wreckage of the flawed past. He fell quiet for an extended pause. His focus apparently split between our exchange and the ongoing overhaul of existence encircling us. When he resumed, his tone softened. The weight of his aura lightened a touch. And what course would you propose for me, Malchon? What option do you present against my decree? I weighed my reply with utmost care, aware that Trillian's destiny balanced on it. Lead them, my lord, not as a deity raining destruction from on high, but as in your early days, as a guide. Illuminate the road to the destiny you once pictured, amend their missteps. Yes, chastise those who've most vilely misused your legacy. Yes, but grant humanity space to absorb lessons, to advance, to prove deserving of the promise you once perceived in them. His face remained inscrutable. His mind eluded my grasp. The warp's metamorphosis persisted nearby, albeit at a gentler pace, as though he'd shifted part of his vigilance to our discourse. You're urging restraint toward a race that squandered 10,000 years on folly, amplifying errors rather than heeding them. You're urging stewardship over those who've shown themselves unfit for the simplest tenets I set forth. Yes, my lord, for that defined you. Not a divine arbiter, but an educator, a patriarch, one who grasped that progress demands time, errors, absolution. He averted his eyes from me, staring into the cosmos sprawled vulnerably ahead. I perceived his awareness brushing remote suns, remote psyches, gauging the merit of societies that had ascended and crumbled in his prolonged seclusion. Maybe, he conceded at length, your counsel carries insight, Malchion. Maybe my verdict rushed forth, tainted by 10,000 years of anguish and the corruption of my legacy. Maybe another path exists. I detected an abrupt alteration in the warp, a pivot in the aureate surge that had been reforging it. Not mere feeling, but a shift in intent. What had served as an instrument of retribution now appeared to probe, scrutinize, appraise with finer discernment. I shall not reclaim the golden throne, he went on. That cage confined me far too long, nor will I tolerate the endurance of the imperial creed, the debasement of knowledge into dogma, the conversion of relief washed over me in waves so powerful that, for an instant, I worried my augmented body might falter under its force. The entity capable of reshaping existence at will had actually heard me out, the pleas of one of his own creations, and deemed them worthy. My lord, I am grateful, I replied plainly, aware that anything more florid would be out of place or excessive. Hold your thanks, Malchon, he cautioned, his tone sharpening with intent. The Imperium, as it has endured for thousands of years, will still meet its conclusion. The wicked shall still encounter retribution. Structures erected on deception will still crumble. The misguided worship forged in my honor will still vanish, yet it will unfold with care. Acknowledging that not every soul entangled in this framework bore the same guilt, he faced me once again. His features now resembled those of a strategist mapping out a battle, intent and resolute. And you, my loyal yet skeptical Malchon, who dared to challenge a deity, shall serve as my tool in the trials ahead, my herald to those too fragile for my unfiltered essence, my envoy to the humanity I once understood and might rediscover. Before I could muster a reply, the fabric of reality twisted anew. The emptiness of the cosmos vanished, giving way to the shattered splendor of the imperial palace. We were in a room I knew well, altered by his aura. The Senatorum Imperialis, once the domain where the High Lords of Terror had ruled the Imperium in his stead. The enormous council table remained intact, but the seats encircling it stood vacant, their previous holders now condemned and deemed insufficient. "This marks the starting point of the overhaul," he declared, striding to the table's forefront and indicating the chair at his right for me. "The initial of countless discussions that will sculpt the path forward. You've secured your role here, Malchon. Your perspective matters." As I settled into the position, the gravity of the exchange settled upon me. I, a guardian forged for unquestioning obedience, had confronted the Emperor directly and survived the encounter. Beyond that, I'd swayed his verdict, redirecting his fury, not fully to compassion, but to a more tempered evaluation. It bordered on unthinkable blasphemy, yet it stood as, quite possibly, the purest devotion I'd ever offered. "The road ahead won't be straightforward, Malchon," he observed, effortlessly scanning my mind. "The galaxy has acclimated to its decay, its concessions, its soothing falsehoods. Stripping them away will spark agony, opposition, and outright insurrection. Conflicts will erupt on a level unseen since the Horus Heresy. Torment will unfold across magnitudes that could shatter weaker wills merely to behold. Yet hope will emerge too. An opportunity for humankind to fulfill its destined form, liberated from the chains of unquestioning devotion, spared the assaults of chaos and alien threats, empowered to harness its latent psychic gifts without the taint that has shadowed them." He inclined toward me, his gaze alight with resolve rather than condemnation. "This defines our mission, Malchon. Not humanity's annihilation, but its renewal. Are you equipped for the demands of that?" My mind turned to the Imperium I'd served, its brutalities and its acts of benevolence, the billions upon billions of existences poised to be upended by the impending shifts, the pillars of society, the creeds, the doctrines, the bedrock of human society that would be uprooted, abandoning myriad spirits adrift in a cosmos abruptly remade. I reflected, too, on the inherent promise always latent in humanity, the aptitude for splendor that the Emperor had perceived and aimed to cultivate, the vision he held of humanity ascending past its primal origins to achieve genuine elevation, a prospect that, against all expectations, might still come to pass. Quote 10. "I affirmed, my words firm with fresh resolve, for mankind, for the tomorrow ahead, for the Imperium that could yet arise." He inclined his head, content with my resolve, and in that instant, as his focus shifted to reforge the course of human fate, I grasped the real response to the query that had ignited this odyssey. What unfolds when the Emperor awakens at last? All transforms, the stars shudder, even the divine cower, and humanity confronts not oblivion, but a fresh dawn. Whether that dawn heralds doom or ascension is yet unclear. But I, Malchon Vane, the final devoted heir to the authentic Emperor, shall observe it unfold, and maybe, in modest measure, help steer it. The labor commenced without delay. No rituals, no proclamations, no official proclamations marked the Emperor's awakening. Such formalities proved redundant when his influence resonated in the psyche of every attuned mind across the stars. In their stead came resolve and guidance. The overhaul of a society that had endured 10,000 years of gradual decline marked a profound shift. The Emperor's verdicts persisted, yet they carried the exactness of a surgeon's blade instead of the sweeping ruin from his early resurgence. The upper ranks of imperial authority encountered his examination first. Individuals who had misused their positions, distorted his ideals for personal gain, or exploited others' misery were excised without pity. No longer obliterated from being, they faced penalties tailored to their offenses, their thoughts reprogrammed to grasp the complete burden of their wrongs. In contrast, those who had sincerely aimed to aid humankind, even amid the rot of the framework they operated within, received clemency. Certain ones were even promoted, their intellects broadened by his influence, their insights enriched to fathom the vastness of impending changes. I observed as he reforged Terra, humanity's birthplace reborn as a symbol of mortal accomplishments. The sprawling hive metropolises, teeming with billions in filth and unawareness, escaped demolition, Instead, they underwent renewal, exposed to sunlight and breezes after thousands of years. The industrial plants, which had spewed toxins skyward for 10,000 years, were repurposed. Their mechanical essences swapped for innovations long concealed in Martian archives. And on Mars, the Crimson World itself, quakes rippled at his reappearance, splitting its tech-priest inhabitants between enthusiasts eager to revive the authentic drive for invention lost under ages of ceremony, and diehards gripping the sacred observances that had long shaped the mechanicum. The resistant faction met severe reckoning, their stored wisdom seized prior to the end of their awareness. The receptive group underwent elevation, their cybernetic forms upgraded far beyond imagination, their psyches liberated from the creeds that had bound them. Devices once sealed away, judged overly perilous or too holy for everyday application, now faced renewed scrutiny. A few proved genuinely unstable, tainted by warp's anarchy or beyond's horrors, warranting total annihilation. Yet many others, inventions that might have alleviated agony for trillions and propelled human progress forward by ages, emerged into circulation. In mere months, the Sol system underwent a metamorphosis. Vessels that previously required years for interstellar voyages now crossed the void in weeks. Messaging, once dependent on the grueling rites of astropathic relay, turned immediate over spans once inconceivable. Planets once tethered to Terra for existence now thrived independently. All the while, I acted as his spokesperson, his envoy to those overwhelmed by his unfiltered aura. I journeyed to distant realms throughout the galaxy, delivering his decree of renewal, beholding the collapse of ancient hierarchies and the arduous emergence of the fresh era. Certain populations embraced the tidings with delight, seeing in them the realization of ancient foretellings they had scarcely comprehended. Others pushed back, holding fast to the entrenched vices of the former Imperium, favoring the known fiend over the Emperor's ambiguous prospects. The Space Marines who weathered his preliminary purge split apart. Various chapters welcomed their Primarch's homecoming, humbly yielding to his fixes for the blemishes that had crept into their methods across 10,000 years. Rebellious ones, however, rejected his evolving outlook, clashing with the customs they had upheld so long. These met resolution not via eradication, but isolation, sequestered in cosmic pockets where their customs could persist without obstructing mankind's wider evolution. The imperial cult, that colossal pillar of belief erected on adoring the emperor as deity, posed the toughest edifice to unravel. For countless billions of people, devotion to the god emperor had stood as the sole anchor in existences riddled with torment and dread. To abruptly declare this belief erroneous, that the entity they revered spurned their allegiance, struck a mental shattering many couldn't endure. In this, the emperor displayed an unforeseen compassion. Rather than abruptly wiping out the creed that had buoyed humanity for millennia, he permitted its slow evolution. Ceremonies endured, but their essence shifted. Invocations once aimed at him morphed into reflections on mortal possibilities. Temples formerly consecrated to his glory turned into hubs of education, fellowship, and cultivation of the psyker talents growing prevalent as his warp essence steadied the immaterial realm. And amid every step, humanity's foes remained active. Chaos legions, despite being repelled by Wh40K. After their initial resurgence, the forces of chaos gathered anew in the shadowy recesses of the warp. Their dark patrons diminished yet far from vanquished. The extraterrestrial realms that had long preyed on human territories observed the Imperium's metamorphosis with a blend of dread and ambition. Certain ones pursued pacts with this emerging regime, while others geared up for conflict against a divided adversary. I found myself positioned on the command deck of a craft unprecedented in history, a starship that navigated not via the warp, but by bending the fabric of real space. Relics of tech unearthed from the dark age of technology, refined further by the Emperor's profound grasp of cosmic principles. Through the observation portal, a planet came into view, once a fierce clash site between Imperial defenders and the Tyranid Hive fleet behemoth. It had been ravaged of every trace of vitality, reduced to a desolate stone adrift in emptiness. The Emperor remained at my side, his presence still aglow, but now restrained, directed, the immense energy of his revival harnessed toward deliberate aims. Surrounding us were ex-adepts of the Mechanicum, liberated from the stifling rites that had stifled their ingenuity, overseeing mechanisms far beyond my grasp. Quote 11. He declared, his tone blending command with foresight, the same blend that had forged humanity's unity long ago. Observe. He reached out toward the display, and a wave of energy coursed through me, more potent than any since his revival. The lifeless orb flickered as though distorted by shimmering air. Then, against all reason, verdant hues bloomed over its crust, seas coalesced from mere powder, and vitality surged back into a sphere extinct for ages. This marks merely the beginning, he went on, withdrawing his gesture as the renewal took hold. A single sphere among countless that shall be revived. The Imperium devoured its domains. It plundered their wealth, tainted them with unchecked manufacture, expended them for tactical gains. That era concludes here. Mankind must now cultivate the realms it claims, harmonizing with the cosmos instead of eternally clashing against it. I gazed in wonder as the scene unfolded before us, existence proliferating over the terrain at a hastened pace, steered by arcane devices and forces eluding my understanding. This wasn't the sovereign from ancient lore, the unifier who had imposed order via conquest prior to his grand stellar reclamation. This figure transcended and fell short of that archetype alike, greater in might, in foresight, in the breadth of his designs, lesser in mortal frailties, in concessions, in the pragmatism of his prior dominion. Quote 15. I inquired. Quote 16. He faced me, his visage contemplative, his gaze holding infinities stretching to creation's dawn. Humanity's direst foe has always been its reflection, Melkishan. Its terror, its blindness, its readiness to trade liberty for safety, verity for ease. Confront those defects, and outward perils grow containable. With another motion, the portal altered, revealing scenes of strife across the galaxy. Astartes battling beside Eldari to repel warp-spawned horrors. Human settlers cohabiting with Toh. Diverse peoples upholding their traditions while thriving through partnership. Astonishingly, Necron overlords forging accords with Imperial commanders. Age-old rivals discovering mutual interests against loftier dangers. Quote 18. By the Imperium's old creed, this bordered on blasphemy, a truth I had lived. The deep-seated aversion to alien kinds, etched over eons by real perils and harrowing clashes, ran profound. Still, his reasoning rang undeniable. In a cosmos brimming with inner and outer perils, comrades from any lineage proved invaluable. But the paramount danger, I pressed, the very motive behind founding the Imperium, the surge of human psychic potential, the susceptibility to chaos it entails. His demeanor turned grave, the radiance of his aura sharpening. That peril lingers, more acute than before. Humanity teeters on the cusp of its mental ascension. Each successive generation yields more psychers among our kin. Lacking direction, lacking safeguards, they stay exposed to warp's appetites. The beings termed chaos gods would exploit them as portals into materiality, just as they have throughout history. He had voiced this sentiment to me innumerable times in the past. Now, he pivoted entirely toward me, his aura dominating my awareness. That's precisely why retreat isn't an option for me, Malkin. That's exactly why the Imperium, despite its tainted state, proved indispensable. During this fragile stage of its growth, humanity demands safeguarding. It requires a guardian to steer it along the perilous road of psychic advancement. It requires my involvement. The modesty in that final declaration caught me off guard. Despite his vast might and the profound alterations he had inflicted upon the stars, he acknowledged the boundaries of his own capabilities. Humanity's trajectory ahead remained uncertain. The perils were tangible, the hazards colossal. Even under his personal oversight, victory wasn't inevitable. And in that moment, I grasped the fundamental distinction between the entity standing before me and the deity that humankind had revered across 10 millennia. The divine emperor of the imperial faith stood as flawless, all-powerful, the ultimate resolution to every dilemma and every inquiry. The real emperor embodied something infinitely more intricate, a figure of tremendous strength and wisdom, indeed, yet one who confronted the obstacles on the horizon, who grasped that destiny wasn't fixed, who realized that defeat loomed possible should decisions falter. "I shall persist in my duties, my lord," I replied, sensing the fresh gravity of that vow. "For however long my presence is required, for as long as humanity craves direction amid the trials to follow." He rested his palm upon my shoulder, the contact surging vitality through my frame, revitalizing me in manners beyond my prior comprehension. "Your devotion is merely commencing, Melchon. The overhaul of the Imperium, the revival of planets, the redefinition of humanity's bond with the universe. These represent only the initial phases of an odyssey stretching across ages. Reversals will occur. Defeats will strike. There will be instances when our constructions teeter on the brink of ruin." His stare sharpened, piercing beyond me to destinies beyond my sight. "Yet victories will emerge that defy conception. Revelations that reshape the essence of human existence. Feats that shatter the confines of biology and duration. A humanity liberated from the chains of dread and unenlightenment, prepared, finally, to seize its destined role among the stars." He shifted his attention once more to the display, beholding the revitalized planet now bustling with vitality where desolation had once reigned. "Such is the outcome when the Emperor stirs. Malian, not the apocalypse you once dreaded, but the dawn of what was eternally destined." I remained at his side, observing as the era ahead materialized, world by world. And I understood that although the road forward would prove arduous, although the hurdles might appear overwhelming on occasion, the voyage had commenced. The authentic Imperium, the vision he had forever envisioned, was embarking on its tentative initial strides. What unfolds when the Emperor awakens? All transforms. Uncertainty prevails. The path remains uncharted. But for the first instance in 10,000 years, authentic optimism dawns for humanity. Not the illusory promise of redemption via belief, not the frantic grasp at endurance amid insurmountable foes, but the tangible prospect of evolving beyond our prior selves, of realizing the latent promise ever inherent in humankind, of forging an era deserving of the tolls endured through our endless darkness. The Emperor has roused. The metamorphosis is underway, and I, Malkian Vane, shall observe all that ensues.